Kia ora te whānau I hukarati ko Andrew Lopureho. Today we're looking at the Gospel for Sunday the 21st of September 2025. And it's Luke chapter 16 verses 1 through to 13. The disciples said to Jesus, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you can no longer be manager.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do so that when I'm dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil.' He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'How much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat.' He said to him, 'Take your bill, and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he'd acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a little, in very little, is faithful also in much. And whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." Well, this is one of the most difficult passages of the teachings of Jesus that I have encountered. It's almost, on the face of it, looks as if Jesus is encouraging dishonesty, appears to be applauding the dishonest steward, suggesting that we use money to manipulate people. And yet, this is so contrary to the Jesus way, at least the Jesus way that I've known after so many and on so many decades, that way of reading it just can't be right. So what are we to do? Well, one of the things I know that I tended to do, is that I just won't talk about something until I think I've got a clear handle on what it's about and what it makes sense. Otherwise, just lay a passage aside and just leave it aside until such a time as insight, as understanding, as clarity comes. Now, there's a phrase that's used here called dishonest wealth. And in the Old King James Version, it was called the mammon of unrighteousness. And perhaps what it's suggesting is simply that money can be a real trap. Claims our allegiances and our priorities, and the desire to get it by any means possible can become paramount for us. It's a very easy trap to fall into. Now, for me, I need to be clear, and I think we need to be clear, that we need to read the whole of this passage through the lens of how Jesus finishes it. That it is consistent with what we know of Jesus. And he finishes it with this. Remember again, verses 10 following. "Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much. And whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If you then have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. So there's a sense that Jesus is saying you've got to make a clear choice here. You've got to actually set your compass on serving God, and actually when you do that, everything else will take care of itself. So I'm suggesting we need to view this passage through that lens. So what's going on here? Well, as I said, on the surface it seems problematic. You've got the steward who the rumour of his dishonesty has come back to his master. And his master calls him to account and says, look, if this proves to be true, which it's not looking good for you, mate, you're going to have to find another job because you can't work for me anymore. So this man knows he's in a bind and he thinks, what am I going to do? He said, I don't have any other skills, and I'm just not fit enough or healthy enough or young enough anymore for heavy manual labour, and begging's just not an option. It's too demeaning. So what he does is he looks at the business as it is and he calls in the creditors, the people that owe money to the master, to his boss. Now, this is the difficult bit in terms of understanding what's going on here, because the master actually applauds the steward for what he's done. He realizes that he's been very crafty and very clever. So how are we to understand this? Why would he commend somebody who at one level has actually ripped him off? Well, of the commentators that I read, the best one that fitted the bill for me was Leon Morris. And I thought that his take on it was quite compelling. And so I'm going to share with you basically, as I remember it, because it's been a while since I read it, what he actually had to say about it. What he does is he strikes right at the heart of the issue, in that in Jewish society, usury was forbidden. You were not allowed to charge interest on loans to your fellow Israelites. You just didn't do that. If you loaned them 50 jugs of oil, you would expect 50 back. You didn't charge interest or loan the value of it. And I think this, I suspect, is at the heart of the issue here. So rather than lending money where it becomes clear that usury is involved, what Morris suggests is that the trade was taking place in terms of in kind, according to the barter system. So, for example, someone would come to you and you knew that they were credit worthy, that they were a good risk, and they'd say, I want to borrow so much money off you. It is the equivalent of 80 containers of wheat. And you look at them and say, that's fine. You need to repay me the equivalent of 100. But then someone who was less credit worthy might come and say, look, I want to borrow from you as well. And you'd say, rightio, I'll lend you the equivalent of 50 jugs of oil, but you'll have to pay me back 100. Because oil could be easily doctored. Oil could be watered down and the quality be quite variable. And I imagine the quality could be argued with wheat as well. And it may be that initially it started by the products actually changing hands. But my hunch is that, particularly the way we read the story, right out for such and such amount, that no actual product was changing hands. it was written out as the equivalent, a wee bit like paper money used to be backed up by the gold standard. We knew the gold was there somewhere. We just didn't trade gold. We traded bits of paper. And it seems likely, and I think Morris is probably right here, that this is what was happening here. So rather than trading money, they'd say, okay, well, I'm lending you 50 jugs of oil and you're going to pay me back 100. And it's a way of getting around the usury laws. So here's the thing. What the steward does is he knows that charging interest is illegal. And he also realizes that what the master is doing, which I suspect was probably fairly universal, is a bit sus. It's not quite as honest as it might be. So he says when he hears that, how much do you owe? He says 100. He knows that the thing for oil is 100%. So half of it, 50. Right out for 50, because he knows that would have been the original sum that was lent. And the same with the wheat. How much do you owe? 80? 100? Well, he would know that the sum that he would have been lent was 80. So he said, just give me 80, just give me 50. And that was in accordance with actually not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law as well. And at this point, his master could hardly complain. He could hardly complain because he was simply getting back what he lent. And he can commend the steward for what he's done. Now, at one level, on the surface of it, the people that he had actually blessed in this way, you'd think, why would they trust him? But the reality is, if this is really what was happening, they'd say, this guy's actually quite smart and quite shrewd. I'd rather have him on my side. So there's also a sense of obligation that allows him to capitalize on his cunning maneuver that he has just done. Yet Jesus comes back to this point. He says, if we can be trusted in the small things, we can be trusted with the large things. And it's not that the small things don't matter, because they do. It reminds me of Lord Acton's dictum about power. He said that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I liked Dallas Willard's take on it. He disagreed with that. He says, no. He says, power doesn't corrupt. He says, it just shows us what's there. And I think he's right. It shows us how we exercise power, shows us our character. And it's true with things like money, it's with wealth, with all these kind of things. All it does is that when we get more of it, is what we get is that we see in the little things, all they are is amplified in the bigger things. It shows us our true character. It shows us what's really there. Because the small things matter. Some 56, 55 years ago, we had the Browns became our neighbours. We had a long legan, and they were building on the one side of the legan that we had. They built a new house. And as they were an older couple, and as the house was getting built, there was piles of 4x2 building timber all over the place. So I asked if I could have a little bit of it, just the short bits, for building a hut. And they said, yeah, that's fine, but just take the small bits. Well, the small bits got longer and longer and longer, and I built a pretty good hut. But at the time I didn't think much about it. But I look back, even not that long after, and realised that I had actually been stealing from them. The little things became bigger and bigger. And 55 years ago, it's still with me that I had stolen timber from the Browns. I'm sure there's a whole lot of other evil things I've done over the years that haven't yet come to my consciousness, but this is one of those things that was always there. And the truth is that we never actually get away with anything. E. Stanley Jones, I remember I've been reading one of his books. This one's called The Way, and I've just started on again for the second time. One of the things he says is, that saying, be sure your sins will find you out. He says, it's not that there's something's going to happen that's going to ping you, but there's a sense that within you, you're going to know. It's always there. Your sin finds you out. Julian of Norwich, she put it beautifully. I've read her book a number of times, and it's she says sin is its own punishment. God doesn't punish us. It's something that we end up doing to ourselves, because the little things actually matter. When you go shopping, I don't know what happens for you, but there are times that if I'm overcharged, and it's clear, I'm not worried about a few cents here and there or a dollar here or there, but I've just always done a quick arithmetic thing, and when it seems to be a lot more than I was expecting, I'll ask and they'll show me how it was arrived at, and sometimes it's a mistake. But I'll also do it the other way. Just recently I was in a cafe and I bought a number of things, and she charged me $12, and I knew it had to be a lot more than that, because I said, no, you haven't charged me enough. Oh, okay. And I've only ever had one person who got really annoyed that I accused them of undercharging me. She would rather have been ripped off than be wrong. But it's because in those kind of things, for me, if I know, the little things actually matter. Now, I'm not trying to paint myself as a saint, because I certainly ain't. I'm not. But here's the thing, and I was used to be interested in this in terms of when I was in parish ministry. If you find me to be a liar, as less than truthful, I'm saying to you now, stop tuning in. If I can't be trusted in the ordinary, everyday things, stop tuning in. Why would you trust somebody with the things that really matter, that you think has deep spiritual insight or insight into the Word of God, if they can't be trusted with the ordinary things of life? If they can't be trusted to keep an accurate record of their leave, if they can't be trusted with their mileage claims and those kind of stuff, if I can't trust them with that, why would you want to trust me to talk to you about the way of God? I hope this makes some kind of sense to you, because I think it's really quite important. Does this mean that I'm perfect? Of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. The reality is, though, is that Jesus is calling us into a freedom. And he's also encouraging us to recognize that actually the little things matter, and there's things that should just become automatic for us, that we don't have to think too much about. They just become part of our DNA, hardwired into us. But he's also encouraging us in that freedom to recognize the opportunities that are put in front of us, the good ones. And we see this in the text, and to help, I really like the way that Eugene Peterson puts it in the Message. So listen to this again, and you probably won't even recognize where it comes from, but it's his take on the text that we've had today. Now here's a surprise, says Peterson. The master praised the crooked manager. And why? Because he knew how to look after himself. Streetwise people are smarter in this regard than law-abiding citizens. They're on a constant alert, looking for angles, surviving by their wits. I want you to be smart in the same way. This is Jesus saying it. But for what is right, using every adversity to stimulate you to creative survival, to concentrate your attention on the bare essentials, so you'll really live, and not complacently just get by on good behaviour. I think he's onto it. As long as our moral compass is set on Jesus, on seeking the good of those around us, of loving people and not using them and abusing them, we don't have to keep second-guessing ourselves all the time. Because we're called into freedom, we're called into fruitfulness, and called into joy. Amen. God bless you.